In the space of about 5 weeks, I went from being a local somebody to being a world champion. It was an absolute dream come true. But no one has it easy. There's not a straight line to success.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit Podcast, the show for people shaping the future of sport. Driven by my curiosity working in the industry, I've brought together leading executives to host conversations with decision makers across innovation, marketing, media, finance, and performance, unpacking their strategies and industry-shaping ideas.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit Performance Podcast. I'm Rich Buchanan, and today Andy and I are delighted to be joined by someone who really embodies the journey of high performance in all its forms. From Olympic champion to leadership and education coaching in the business of sport. Tim Foster MBE, welcome to the Sports Pundit Performance Podcast. It's fantastic to have you with us.
An absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me on.
Tim, you're obviously well known to many for standing on top of the podium at the Olympic Games in Sydney 2000. But since then, you've certainly carved out a fascinating career in high performance coaching, both in sport and business, and now as the head of performance for the LMA, the League Managers Association. I'd like to start this conversation off by reflecting on your time sort of prior to that Sydney Olympics and whether you can kind of recall any key moments that set you on the path to becoming an elite athlete and ultimately a gold medal winning Olympian.
No, I mean, it's a little while ago now, as you alluded to there, but no, I was a teenager that dreamt about winning Olympic gold medals. I love sport. I loved all sports. I was a bit of a jack of all sports, but rowing was the one I was better than average at. I was good at. But a couple of moments, I guess I'd relate to. One was as a 16, 17-year-old, just really making the breakthrough. I'd been doing the sport because I loved doing it. I'd been doing it relatively locally, and I was growing up in Bedford for a school and a small clubs that really would be like League One, League Two level if you were talking sort of football equivalents. But then actually I got spotted, and actually in the space of about 5 weeks, I went from being a local somebody to being a world champion. And actually that was a huge step in my career, something that opened my eyes up to what was possible. I was there to kind of a teenager with focus, and that sort of took me through sort of my late teens and into the 20s, and took me on this journey that I never regret, really. And fast forwarding about 10 years where I went through the sort of amateur days. I was in a sport where you had to be amateur. There were no professionals allowed. There was no money involved. And yet we came back from the Atlanta Olympics, 1996, we're up to by now. Got a bronze medal. We missed out on winning gold by a fraction of a meter. But actually on the back of that and the results, and not just we'd had, but British sport had National Lottery came in, we could professionalise. And I don't just mean in terms of money, I mean in terms of attitude and everything else. And that took me again to another level. And if we're talking about elite performance, I think that was, it's probably slightly odd to be talking about the step up to elite performance, having already won World Championships and Olympic medals, but it was just realization of what elite really meant. And I think the last few years of my athletic career, and then as a coach, the way that things have professionalized and moved on has been amazing to be part of, really.
You mentioned there about sort of the timeline, if you like, and how the professionalization occurred sort of in good time for you, I guess, when it came to transitioning into an elite sport or becoming an elite athlete. Were there any kind of bumps in the road there? I've read about certain injuries that you suffered and things that you had to overcome. So I'm curious to know, how did you push through those things and how did those kind of setbacks shape who you are and what your approach to kind of training and competition is today?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy retrospectively, and I guess when you're on a podcast like this, to just remember the good times and sort of remember how lovely that was. And standing on the podium, as you mentioned, was an absolute dream come true. But no one has it easy. I mean, there's not a straight line to success. And for me, particularly, injuries played a huge part to my own career and development. I would claim I'd sit a bit taller. I've had a couple of discs taken out of my back. I've had knees operated on. And to be honest, in my career, probably the thing I was most scared of was my body would let me down. I could take on Italians, I could take on Australians, I could take on the rest of the world, but actually it was getting to a point where my body would allow me to do the stuff I wanted to do. And yeah, whoever said sport was good for you didn't do the 10,000 repetitions kind of repeatedly again and again and again. And yeah, my body was letting me know sometimes when I had to hold back. And yeah, whether it was, particularly back injuries, which is like a rower's, Achilles heel, because like you're putting a lot of pressure through your legs, you're hanging on with your arms, and actually, your body sometimes sort of shows the sort of wear and tear signs. And yeah, it was interesting. Even, and if I recount a particular story where I'm about to have a fairly major operation on my back, and I'm being filmed for a documentary series we're doing at the time, and if I play it back now, I can hear myself saying, when I win that gold medal, I'll know what I've had to go through to do it, and it'll make it worthwhile. And it probably, surprises stroke impresses me actually how bloody minded I was, actually, despite the fact I couldn't walk at the time, I couldn't sit up, I couldn't do normal things. I'm talking about winning the Olympics, and because that's the light at the end of the tunnel. That's what's going to get me through this next stage of whatever I've got to get through.
Was that sort of self-determination innate part of you, or was that part of that professionalization that you talked about? I know you were part of a crew that was led by a famous coach, Jürgen Grobler, who many regard as one of the greatest in any sport. Was it learnings from him that helped you along the way with these kind of situations, or again, was it something that was just in you?
Undeniably. I'd say there was a innate part of me that was driven. I'm not someone who wears it on their sleeve or shouts about it, but I think the people that get to know me quite well realise there's this sort of steely side underneath, and that was driving me. But I'd 100% admit you can't do it alone. I've never met in 40 years of being involved in high performance sports someone who's done it on their own. And whether sometimes it was the teammates, I was very lucky. Especially in the sort of the last few years, Steve Redgrave, Matthew Pinston, James Cracknell, you couldn't get a more diverse, small group of people who were driven to the same goal. Each of us were coming from a different corner, and yet we were very happy to meet in the middle. Or whether it was Jürgen Grobler, again, as you just mentioned, a coach who'd been at the top, or was at the top for 44 years, winning gold medals every Olympics. He went to absolutely phenomenal. And if you didn't get either inspired or motivated or to come home with learnings from that group, you weren't elite athletes. I think part of being an elite athlete is your ability to be self-aware and to learn and improve. And I was very lucky to be in an environment where that was the culture, that was the norm.
Tim, when you talked about your journey, you mentioned getting spotted, and obviously you also just alluded to the fact that all four of you that ended up on that same team were very different as well. So what was it you think that kind of attracted them to sort of pay attention to you? Like, what was the talent ID process then, and how's that evolved, I guess, since you've gone on to become a coach?
It is interesting now. Rowing's a small sport relatively, and the shame was probably in the 1980s and the 1990s, there was probably half a dozen Steve Redgraves out there playing bad rugby, and actually hadn't been picked up by the sport of rowing. And especially probably myself and Steve came into the sport almost by accident. It wasn't through any deliberate talent idea. I was rowing because my mates did it, and I found it quite fun. And there's a river that runs through the middle of Bedford, which I'd seen people rowing on and thought, well, that looked quite good and quite fun. So there was no science or deliberateness to it in those days until I got to a certain point. And actually, I remember there was one particular race where I entered with a friend of mine. We were in a pair together, and we ended up beating one of the British top pairs. And at that point, the selectors sort of slightly confusingly kind of turned around and were like, well, who the hell are those two? And what are they doing here? And why are they going fast? And in a funny way, that lasted through my career, because despite not being small, I am small compared to most international rowers. I'm not the power athlete. I'm not somebody whose talent could often be measured by performance metrics that are easy to get on land, particularly. Like the one performance metric I was good at was making boats go fast. And actually, sometimes that would be because I could help people do better in themselves, or I could create a platform that others could get the best out of themselves. And very definitely in that four that ends up racing at Sydney, that was my role. I was the facilitator in a way. And I was lucky to be part of it because, I had three really big, powerful athletes. And in a way, their job was to produce the positive numbers. My job was to minimize the negative numbers and actually sort of sew it together, which does make it, in a funny way, harder to be spotted. But nowadays, as I say, they are much better at putting a science behind it and actually creating sort of deliberate pathways for younger athletes to come through.
The way you described yourself there reminds me of a story or an article that came out called the No Stats All-Star about a basketball player called Sean Battier. Which is basically like all the teams he was on would win, but there was nothing in his individual statistics that could be picked out as to like why he was the star player or why he was so crucial to kind of holding the team together.
I'll look that up because actually it reminds me. There was a particular moment actually, and we're going way, way back, obviously, because I was a young athlete coming through, and Jürgen Grobler had just come over from East Germany and was now the head coach of the British team. And I guess he inherited me as a bit of a young rebel that, hadn't come through the sort of deliberate system. And actually, probably fair to say we didn't see eye to eye because, he brought over science. He brought over this sort of methodology, and I didn't fit any of his criteria at all. I wasn't tall enough. I wasn't big enough. I wasn't producing the power. But anyway, we'd just been to a World Championships, and the crew I was in had done very well. And to be fair to him, it was already one of the world's leading coaches. He turns to me, and actually we're sitting on a plane because our surnames are alphabetically very, very close together. And he goes, "Tim, you have something to teach me because I have no idea why you go fast." And actually, it was quite a seminal moment because I have all of this data and you were never on page one. And actually, you seem to make boats go fast. And to be fair to Jürgen, and I'd give him real credit. I mean, obviously, not just through his success, but his ability to adapt. He wasn't so set in his ways, even at that point, having been and was then still for the next 20 years, like probably the world's best rowing coach. He was willing to learn and he was willing to find things. And he saw in me as a bit of a challenge. He wanted to understand what was it that I had that made boats go quicker. And ultimately, how could he measure it? How could he repeat it? And in the crews that we saw, especially in the early 2000s, you could see that there was a formula that he was now repeating that had been what had worked in the Sydney team. And there were people like me in the crews that followed.
I think that's a fascinating insight and a lesson there to learn from, everybody who's listening there, that sometimes, the key component perhaps might not be obvious. It reminds me of a book called The Captain Class, which explores kind of common themes and trends in the world's most successful teams. And with that in mind, Tim, I wanted to explore kind of your thoughts on, as a world-class athlete, someone who's trained and competed against the very best. I'm curious to know kind of what qualities that you see consistently displayed by those that you've been around. And I suppose what in your mind then kind of separates the good athlete to the absolutely elite.
It's a really good question. And I'll sort of segue slightly because it's a question I really struggled with when I first got into coaching because I was biased. Because what did elite athletes look like? Well, they look like me. And actually, because of the things and I don't mean that and it's not meant to be in any way a big-headed statement, but because I had a really clear idea of what I thought was really important and what made teams go fast. And it was what had really worked for me. And that was what I took into my coaching and then tried to really, it became a central bit. And again, Jürgen comes into this story again. He was really integral. And because, anyway, the long story is I take a team to the World Championship. First year I coach, they win the World Championships. And at this point, I think I'm a pretty good coach. And actually, it's kind of all going as amazingly as I think it could. Everyone congratulates me. Jürgen comes up and is like, "Tim, anybody can do it once." And actually, I hated hearing it I probably didn't listen enough, but actually it made me realize that there are other skills and other things to elite performance that I hadn't really taken on board. And if you were to ask me now, I mean, there are some pretty obvious ones. I think that like sort of talent, dedication, sort of resilience, like thriving under pressure and competition. But I'd also sort of include things like self-awareness and the ability to learn, to listen and improve, the mindset of loving what you do. I'd also, and I think again, maybe I mentioned it a little bit earlier, I allude to nobody does it alone, that actually an elite performer has to be able to work with people, even in what might be considered an individual pursuit. I've been lucky enough to be involved a little bit with some of the track and field coaches and ultimately their athletes. And there's a team that sits behind the individual, and that individual will not succeed unless they can sort of work with their team or listen to their coach, learn and improve. And it's a lot of the discussions I'm really lucky to have with some of the football managers now, with some of the work I do with the LMA. And again, it's a question I'll ask is who helped you? And they've always got a story about who was there, whether it's a coach, a teacher, a parent, a friend, a brother, or whoever it might be. But yeah, no one has ever answered that question with, well, I did it alone. It's impossible.
I take from that's probably the non-negotiable then, that you have to have emotional intelligence and be able to be self-aware and learn from others. Do you think a quality or qualities like that then exist in high performance sport, but perhaps are lacking in other areas, dare I say it, the business world that you operate in, or everyday folk?
I do. And so I'm lucky enough to transition from sport to business, and sometimes sort of business to sport. And that's, I think, a really sort of fascinating sort of bridge, because I'm biased. I believe there are so many similarities and so many commonalities, but that is, as you described, one of the things I think that business doesn't always get right, that maybe the person who's at the top has sort of looks from the outside in and not always kind of learnt the right lessons from who they see at the top. Because, I mean, to be honest, I mean, yeah, we can all write a book about ourselves and say what we're really good at, or actually point out what we want people to know about us. And that might not be 100% of actually who we are. And I'll be guilty of that. Like sometimes I think what's really important is what I've got in my head. And as I say, I had to really learn when I became a coach that other people were wired in a different way, and actually in different situations, in different teams, a different form of leadership or a different form of working together might be the best way to do it. Sport is a really good way of finding that out. I think, yeah, you don't become elite by luck. I don't believe in luck, really. That yes, you have to sometimes have opportunity, and there are people who probably don't get given the opportunities, which is a shame, which means they don't make it to the top. But I don't think there's anyone, again, who's made it to the top that can say, well, luck was a big part of what I did. Even to say, yeah, going back 30 odd years when I got first spotted, you could probably turn it around and say, well, I was probably unlucky not to be spotted earlier, because actually it was ultimately results that got me noticed. It wasn't because my name fitted, or I'd come from the right club, or I'd got the right background. It was purely because I'd beaten the person who they ranked really highly, and they thought, well, actually, this person must be all right. Let's have a little look at him. And it's wrong to think that luck would play that part. Yeah. I will admit opportunity is part of it.
I'm keen to explore your transition into coaching, but before I do, I'd love to know if there's anything you did as an athlete or even as a coach afterwards that perhaps to others they might consider it extreme in terms of kind of behaviors or actions. But for kind of high performance sport, it's perhaps considered normal.
That's a really good question. And in a funny way, you might have to ask my teammates, because I think there were definitely times when I think we'd surprise each other. And I do remember sometimes James Cracknell kind of coming back to me. And it was coming back from my back injury. And I mean, the build up to Sydney Olympics, I had this back injury. I ultimately had to have this operation. It's the second time I'd had to have a disc removed. And I think no one had ever had this operation once and come back into the sport. For me to have it a second time was, obviously pretty special. And there was a big chance I wasn't coming back. And actually, he didn't say it to my face, but he does say it to the documentary. And it's almost like he's in tears when he says it, because I'm getting back into a boat for the first time. I've been out for best part of 9 months, I haven't been able to walk, I haven't been able to do normal human things, and yet my pathway has come up, and now I've got back in a boat for the first time. And it was actually, and I don't know if I can swear, but Tim's effing tough. Kind of, and I would never say that about myself. It was kind of just that ability to see through things and actually quietly go about what then needed to be done. As I say, I'm not a shouter, or I'm not look at me, look how tough I am, because actually I think almost people who do shout at them only try to convince themselves of it. But if I say it, I'll do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that was, for me, one of my super strengths, was actually if I'd set my target, coming back from injury or winning the World Championships or achieving a certain physical performance or a speed performance in the boat, okay, that's the target that I'll hold myself accountable for. If I've got as far as making that decision, that was the hard point. Like sometimes the decision of what to aim for and how to do it was what took me the challenge. But then once I've put it in there and metaphorically put it up on the wall, that's where I'm heading to. That's where I'm going to get to.
Extreme resilience and determination.
Yeah, and let's say it's funny because I would never characterize myself overtly as that, and people who meet me would never say, "Oh yeah, Tim's a really driven, bloody minded sort of individual." But then I think people who know me quite well realise, I say, there's this bit that's underneath that's actually sort of driving me quite strongly.
This podcast is produced by O6, but more than just being a production partner, they're also active members of the Sports Pundit community. Having seen the work they're doing across the industry up close, working with leading F1 teams and Premier League clubs, as well as top creators, I'm so delighted to now have them on board and helping to elevate this show to a new level. In terms of setting those goals, I'm curious, because obviously, like, once you win an Olympic gold medal, you've kind of reached the peak of the ultimate goal you can go for, really, like from both the sport perspective, but even wider than that. Like, there's not many accomplishments out there bigger than winning a gold medal at the Olympics. So how do you continually set goals for yourself once you transition out of being an athlete into being a coach, and now obviously working in wider sporting kind of context or business context?
It's a really good question. And I'll admit I've struggled, and I think a lot of athletes do struggle, in that the difference of sport is sometimes, and not always, but sometimes the goals are more easy to quantify. You can talk about a time that you can achieve or a physical output, sort of whether it's a wattage or something that actually you want to be able to do, or a number of points per season to win even on win on Saturday. It's relatively easier, I think, because it's a little bit more quantifiable, but also often it's time stamped. Like for us to win the Olympics, it was September the 23rd. There was absolutely no point being the fastest in the world on September the 24th, because that was actually going to be the first day off in ages. So no one really cared who was the fastest on the Sunday. It was going to be who's fastest at 10:30 on the Saturday morning, and that will determine, ultimately who's the Olympic champion. So I do think that helps. I do admit, and I will admit that actually once I'd achieved it, it was harder to want to replicate. I probably spent a bit of time after the Olympics, having won the gold medal, thinking, oh, that's so nice. That felt fantastic. I'd love to do that again. But I fairly quickly realized that as much as I thought I might want to do it again, I didn't want to do it again enough. And having maybe talked about my strength being this resilience and this sort of drive, it's all very well to say I wanted to do it, but I was now starting to, whether it's cut corners or look for easier excuses, which I would have never have done before. Like having a disc removed from your back is a pretty good excuse not to carry on, but that wouldn't stop me. But then after the Olympics, it's an over-exaggeration to say, oh, it's raining today, I'm not going to go out there. But suddenly other things started to interfere. And I'll admit, I was lucky because I had coaching. Coaching almost kind of helped me avoid a real sudden retirement, because a lot of what I loved about the sport was the culture, the engagement, the challenge of being the best in the world. And even while being a coach, even if I wasn't the one physically performing, I could help this team to become the best in the world. And actually that really sort of drove me through it. I'll admit now I'm a little bit older, I'm a little bit sort of longer in the tooth, and I got to the point I wanted a Sunday off. I'd spent 30 years, 7 days a week, 49 weeks a year, doing what I really loved doing. But now I was in my 40s, I'd got young children, I'd got other things. And it wasn't that I didn't want to do it, but I realized actually I was potentially going to start to let people down because I wanted that Sunday off. And if you were my athletes, I'd look at you, oh, you're looking a little bit tired. I think you should have Sunday off. Not because you genuinely needed Sunday off, but because actually I started to have reasons to be elsewhere. And that for me was quite a dangerous mentality for me to have. And I mean, it sounds slightly over dramatic, but I had to effectively drop myself. Like actually, I realized that I was in Switzerland at the time, coaching the Swiss national team. And I think I realized they were not going to win if I was coaching them, because actually they needed somebody with more drive, more excitement, somebody, I had whatever it was by that point, six Olympics of experience, but they needed somebody who was probably doing it for the second time, and actually you had the learning from the first and the drive to do it again, and that was no longer me.
That's incredible honesty, and certainly displays a high degree of self-reflection. Just thinking about when you initially transitioned into coaching, was it because you were searching for a purpose kind of beyond the boat? And I heard somewhere that Jürgen had said to you, about coaching. Maybe it was that flight that you referred to earlier on when he was saying that he could, or you could teach him something. But was that him believing in you a super important factor behind you then becoming a coach?
It was, and I say Jürgen features quite prominently as a man of otherwise few words, but he comes up with some real nuggets, and that's I guess the person that he is. Because I'd say not long after Sydney Olympics, I'd got into a room to have a meeting with him, and effectively I was trying to bluff it, to say, well, actually I can carry on for another 4 years as an athlete, because that was my profession, that was what I was being paid for, and it was a bit scary to think about, well, if I'm not involved, what do I do next? Because I'd been a rower, and actually I think I pretty much hardly sat down, and Jürgen sort of piped up, goes, Tim, I think you'll be a good coach. And I realized actually that he knew it was time for me to retire. And I knew really, but I just hadn't externally either admitted it or vocalized it. And actually, to be fair to Jürgen, the second part of what he said was, and I'd like you to be my assistant. So actually, you've got the world's top coach in the world's top country, which GB definitely was at the time and still claimed to be. And actually the chance to be number two in that system was a great opportunity. And it was a decision I could make quite easily. I think, again, without trying to be big-headed, I thought I'd be a good coach because I was the sort of athlete that was always thinking of efficient ways to do things, talking and had a voice in the room. And actually it gave me purpose again. Again, as you mentioned, it was still about gold medals. It was still about being the best in the world. It was still an environment that I loved and knew very well. And that was, as I say, when I now look back in it, it was a bit of a sort of a blessing and a beast, because I thought I knew more than I did know. Just because you've been an elite performer doesn't mean you're an elite coach. Because, I went off coaching everybody how I would love to have been coached. And I'd got this really clear idea of what elite coaching was, and it would have been based around having me as an athlete.
What did you have to change or adapt based on that understanding?
Well, I think I probably alluded into one of the other answers. It took me a number of years, because initially I had success. And I think I had a honeymoon period, because, I mean, undeniably, because I turn up I was an athlete on the Tuesday, and I turn up exactly the same venue on the Wednesday, and I'm suddenly the coach, and I'm kind of no longer in the athletes' changing room. I'm in the coach's room, and I'm leading that part of the program. And it was great opportunity, absolutely fantastic, and results were good. So we win the world championship that first year, and actually I'm thinking, God, this is great. I couldn't have nailed it any better. But then, actually, to be fair, with a not dissimilar group of athletes, the next year results were okay, but not brilliant. And then the second year in, results are significantly down, and I'm starting to blame them almost in a way, like they're not listening, they don't get it. How do we freshen this up? And actually, I suppose the self-awareness came in and realized, well, hang on, they do need something different to what I needed. And I would have loved as an athlete for my coach to talk to me about rhythms and movements and feelings and the art of it in a way without sort of going too far. Whereas some of the athletes wanted numbers, they want science, they want to be told what to do, and they actually want these instructions, which for me honestly would not have worked. But there were athletes that just wanted to know, well, you want me to do this? Okay, I'll do it. And that was a real learning lesson for me. I mean, I can explain it hopefully in a couple of minutes, but we're talking 3-4 years into my coaching career before I think I finally got it. And then it took a number of years again to sort of understand people better and to understand them as people and individuals rather than just an athlete or a rower that, wanted to go faster. Because, the downside I think of, and I say this actually applies to business as well as to sport, we take our top performers and we promote them to that next level of seniority until actually ultimately you get promoted beyond your competence. And actually ultimately, just because you're a really good salesperson or just because you're a really good footballer or a really good rower doesn't mean you can necessarily coach and lead other people into doing that. And that was, as I say, really true for me. The thing that amazed me with Jürgen, and as I say, 40 years as a coach at the top of a sport that he had never done himself. Like Jürgen was never a rower himself. And I always thought it was a massive disadvantage because he was having to describe a feeling that he'd never felt himself. When you talked about boats going fast, he'd never done it, like to any level whatsoever. And yet I now look back at it and I wonder whether my previous expertise was an advantage or a disadvantage. I think in some fields it's an advantage because, I had this honeymoon period. I got buy-in, I got credibility, but I also came in with preconceived ideas, or I came in with one way of doing things that wasn't everybody's way of doing things. And that took me a number of years to probably get over or recover from.
Based on that, I was listening to you talking and thinking to myself, understanding people and the people that consist of your team that you're coaching or whatever is critical. Do you have any kind of tips or insights about how you might have understood your people better had you known what you know now then?
Yeah. Probably the one thing that really hits me still is there were some things, when having talked about my transition into coaching, I changed a lot. And actually there were things I had to learn as a coach that were different for certain athletes and for different situations. But having said all that, there was a core that I would not change. The fundamentals of quality and quantity and the way and standards and values and the things that sort of sit right in the middle. Yeah, you can hit me as hard as you like, but some of those are not going to change. Like actually that's normal. But one of those things I thought that was in there was my openness as a coach to listen. And I would have always liked to have thought of myself as approachable. And I can't necessarily go completely into all the details, but there was one instance towards the end of my coaching career where I had an athlete come up to me and she said she didn't want to race in the Olympics. And we were not long out from the Olympics. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, why on earth would you not want to go to the Olympics? You've dedicated years of your life to this. And she just didn't want to do it. She had other things in her life that were more important. And I honestly made the mistake again of not listening. I thought, it's just the mood she's in at the moment. She'll get over it. Let's have this meeting again on Monday and talk it through. And actually, to be fair to her, she repeated the same thing again and again. And eventually I heard it. What happened with our series of meetings is she convinced me she was right. And the moral of the story is I wasn't as approachable as I thought it was. It was a conversation that if we'd had it a year earlier, there could have been a plan B. And because for me, results were going really well, that was enough. Like, why would anyone be unhappy if results are going well? And actually, I knew she wasn't as happy as she could have been. There were some sort of issues between her and her direct coach. And actually, I didn't act on it early enough. We had got into the situation where she doesn't go to the Olympics. Like, the team has to break up. It had massive kind of connotations to everybody in the whole team. And yet I feel at least as responsible for it as she does, or as she should, because actually if I'd been the coach I thought I was, then we could have had that conversation a year earlier and maybe found a good compromise, a good solution, or we could have looked purely for a plan B that didn't involve her, because actually she'd had or we'd had that trust between us that we could have that difficult conversation.
Tim, in terms of relating it now to your current role at the LMA, like with a lot of the stuff you've described from your own personal journey, I can imagine there's a lot of relatability there. Applying it across to football management, like particularly the point you made earlier about being a high performing athlete and then transitioning into management and maybe having like a honeymoon period of success. Like there's a couple of managers, without naming anyone specifically, that I can kind of put in that bracket, yeah. I guess. But obviously that connection I'm making between you and football management is one because I know your role now. I'm wondering how that came about. Like what was it that led to your transition into football and applying your knowledge to that space?
I mean, I'll admit it here. Actually, it's not necessarily something we talk about when I talk to the manager. I love football. I've always loved football. And like vast majority, I guess, of youngsters these days that grow up, they aspire to be footballers, or they think they can be a football manager. And actually, I've always been fascinated by the game because actually there's probably another level to football in terms of its complexity that maybe is not in my sport. I'll be honest. Rowing is a more quantifiable sport than football is. And okay, we're getting there with football, but we're still learning along that journey of how we deal with some of the data that we can now have, or some of the decisions that we do have to take. But hopefully, I guess, yeah, in my work with football managers, it's a bit of experience, it's a bit of listening. I never cross the line, and if any of them tell you I do, please let me know that I'm never going to talk to them about the tactics or the techniques or the things that are fundamental, because they're actually fantastically good at that. But often what I can see is they're thrust into management positions, leadership positions, where they're slightly ill prepared. Yeah, because they were really good and have a really good career themselves. They suddenly get given this position of responsibility where there's a lot to it that they maybe we don't realize. A bit of advice I sometimes give is that, yeah, maybe my fundamentals haven't changed as much as I maybe think there are, but I realize coaching there is so much of a bigger picture than I actually ever thought it was when I first started coaching. It was about getting my hands dirty. It was about the sessions I could run this morning and actually the effects I could have at the end of the day. Whereas the managers' role, particularly in football, they can't switch off. It's not just the training pitch. It's the relationship with the board or the owner. It's the relationship with the fans. It's the way that they actually have to communicate. There's the dealing with the pressure and all of the other side of things that's inherent to being a football manager is so important to ultimately getting the success that they crave. And those, I think, are the things that I can probably help with a little bit more. Yeah, having my opinion on whether they should play 4 at the back or 5 at the back is absolutely irrelevant, because I'd be the least qualified person in the room to have that conversation with. But yeah, if they want to talk about kind of self-awareness, 100% there, let's have that chat and see how I can help with them to understand themselves better or understand the situation better. And those are things that I think are not specific to sport, not specific to football, not specific to rowing or Olympic sport, not specific to sport itself either, and that, or whether it's business sort of leaders as well. I think it's something that's part of the leadership aspect rather than it being different whether you're a football leader or a business leader.
Tim, I mean, you've alluded to the fact that people get elevated, promoted into positions because they've perhaps been a good athlete, and hence they become a coach. And football managers are often appointed based on their technical and tactical understanding, maybe some previous results in a different environment. Do you think football has a blind spot, should we say, and kind of undervalues the importance of leadership training, cultural awareness, perhaps compared to other sports? It's obviously notoriously volatile, right? So curious as to your thoughts on that.
And without necessarily defending football, I think other sports can be guilty of it too. It's just less obvious. What qualifications did I have to become national coach in Great Britain? Very few, actually, apart from having done it myself. And it was something, I guess, because of the person I was, I really wanted to learn and I wanted to sort of improve and adapt in that area. I think it's something that the LMA within football does very well, and actually some of the programs that they're running and the masterclasses and the courses that they do help managers at least become aware of it and have the opportunity to learn either from each other or from external experts, maybe like myself or others who do come in. And I think it's something that football has become more open to, even in the time that I've been able to observe relatively closely. You probably got a bit of old school of football's football. And if you tried to talk about anything else, they sort of had at least one ear closed because it's not football. And actually, for example, with the program that we're kicking off tomorrow, there's 50% football managers on there, but there's some rugby coaches, there's some golfers, there's actually a couple of sort of former jockeys on there. And actually, my job is easy. I just get them talking. And actually, they can learn from each other and across sports, because there's a lot to learn from the way that cricket might do it. For example, how the captain's role in cricket is really impactful for the team, or the way the culture is in rugby, or actually my input being from Olympic sports, how actually Olympic sports been able to strategize even in the relatively short term and actually look to get the results it needs. And I'd be very disappointed, I guess, if football hasn't sort of gained from that input. I honestly think that the football managers in the room come out of it not just knowing more about other sports, but actually being able to apply it back to their own situation and realize these are skills that I have got already, or these are skills that I've underused, or even this is something that I've learned that I can now bring back to the training ground or whatever and apply to my team, because I've seen it work elsewhere.
How do you measure the impact of those programs that you run? Is it just through that sort of network, or is it something greater than that, something quantifiable?
It's a really good question. I'd love to come back with you with a stat to say that the top 10 managers in the Premier League have all sat through one of my programs, and but that would be an absolute lie, because it is a volatile world. But we rely on the feedback of the managers. I think, say, with the LMA, one of the things, and I say in an unhumble way, is the way we're regarded, I think, within the sport of football, because people who have been on our programs recommend them to their peers. They actually come out of it with added learning. So one of the really nice parts of my role sometimes is I actually get to go and witness them in the training ground, and I am the fly on the wall, and it's lovely when you hear them speak. David Artell the other night has been on a couple of our programs, and I thought he spoke fantastically. He was sort of interviewed on Sky Sports after they've just beaten Manchester United, and yet like the humbleness and the self-awareness and the way I think he got across the culture, I guess, that he creates within his team was, I can't claim any credit, or the LMA can't claim a big percentage of it, but it's that influence. And the more people like that, I think, that can get the benefit of it, the better.
I suppose the values that you've talked about so far, from yourself as an athlete and from those that you've been surrounded by, and then the ability to help others be better through your work with the LMA. Do you find that there's kind of something that always resonates with those that you're trying to help in terms of their own development, or is it just so diverse depending on who you're speaking to?
It is diverse, and actually that's one of the beauties of the job, is there's no one formula that works for everybody. If somebody could come in and say, these are the 5 key points to being a successful football manager, we'd all do it. And actually that's sort of overly simple, because someone will produce a 6th point and that will be their point of difference, and suddenly that will be the thing that gets them to the top. But coming back, I think, to a point we mentioned earlier, that self-awareness and willingness to learn is undeniably one of the core ones. That the managers I get to work with are surprisingly humble. I kind of have to shut them up sometimes, because I do some work here at the Side Business School, which is part of Oxford University. So you get some pretty smart cookies in the room. And the football managers sometimes they say, "Oh, I'm not intelligent," and I have to stop them there. So it's just because you're not academic, or just because you left school because you were fantastic at kicking the ball, doesn't mean you're not intelligent. Because some of the most intelligent conversations I have with the most self-aware people are in football. It's not necessarily in the university. It's actually impressive to listen to some of the football managers talk about issues that they faced and how they've addressed those issues with solutions. And what is impressive is because they've had no necessary formal training. It's had to come more naturally, or it's had to come more through experience for them, because they haven't always had someone on their shoulder mentoring them or directing them. And to me, that's one of the real pleasures of working in sport, is because they're really, really impressive people. I spend a bit of time out of high performance sport because I say I wanted this Sunday off. And actually what I missed were the people, like the challenge, the impressiveness of people, and watching them kick a ball around is amazing. But that's only part of it. Like, actually, it's the way that they can manage themselves and the way they can get the best out of themselves. And particularly with the managers, the way they can get the best out of others is really impressive. And as much as I give, I'm sure I come home in the car having gained at least 5 times as much, because my head's spinning. I'm thinking, I wish I'd done that, or I wish I knew that, or that's a really impressive environment to be part of.
We're always learning, and this is partly what Sports Pundit Performance Podcast is about. I love the self-awareness and situational awareness aspects that you're talking about. And it makes me think about what comes next. So I suppose whether that's Olympic sports, whether that's football, or even the corporate world that I know that you're involved in as well, Tim, what do you think is going to be important moving forward?
Yeah, it is. Again, I mean, thank you. You've asked some fantastic questions. So you've got me chatting. You've got me really thinking. I love helping people. I mean, what I really enjoy at the moment is whether it's one morning being involved in football, then the next morning having a bunch of university students, or the next morning having a room full of corporate executives that actually can all challenge me in different ways. And okay, I say I'm older, I'm beyond grey, I'm white, and I'm long in the tooth, but actually I want to keep learning. I still think there's things out there that are answers I'd love to have. I'm trying to sort of form this model of leadership that, I could come back to you and say, okay, this is what it's about. I'm here, but I want it to be here. And actually I want to be able to get that across to people so I can genuinely help them. It's not for the sake of doing it. If actually, it's like, maybe we can bring it back to football, but if I meet someone one week and we have a lovely conversation and I think it's hit home, but then I watch them on the telly and I can see them putting it into action, that's the biggest reward I can get. And I'll admit I'm no longer a fan of one team. I'm a fan of any team that I've helped, and so I can win every week. Maybe that's the sort of other side.
Perfect scenario.
Yeah, exactly. But it's true, and maybe again being slightly self-reflective. I hope I'm good at what I do, but I wouldn't be good at what I do if I didn't care about making a difference. You don't do it for the sake of telling old stories. You don't do it for the sake of me wanting to show them how good I used to be. Actually, I do it because I want them to be better.
On that theme of helping others, and maybe this is the start point for some listeners' journeys here. What's a final question from me? What's the one piece of advice you'd give a young athlete, a young coach, or a young leader in the world of business today about perhaps building a long, sustainable career, maybe in sport, maybe after sport?
I mean, one thing I was good at was mentally getting it right. When I was on, I was on. When I was off, I was off. And actually that was something that allowed me, especially in my athlete days, to have longevity. And I'd admit it, coaching-wise as well. I was really lucky, and I had the social network around me that allowed me to get away. Again, it comes back to this not being able to do it on your own. But if I was out with mates, it wasn't sport that we were talking about, or if it was sport, it wasn't my sport. It was someone else's. So that's important. So undeniably is to look about, sort of kind of have a sort of unselfish selfishness that actually use the people around you and understand what you need and access that and make sure that's something that's available to you. But the thing I think probably, if I'm honest, that underlies that is love what you do and actually find ways to really enjoy it that ultimately mean you can push when you are on, you really are on. And that was, for me, if I turned up at the training ground, anybody I think who rode with me thought, well, hang on, we have to do this with quality. That was my thing. Like, okay, there's no point getting up in crack of dawn in the morning. There's no point traveling all the way in here. There's no point having it written on a piece of paper just because it's written on a piece of paper. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it to the best of our ability and make sure that we get as much as we possibly can out of that. And retrospectively, I can speak with experience. I now honestly look back at those sort of times and think, well, there's nothing more I really would want to have done. That actually I wouldn't change it. I don't have regrets. Kind of definitely not with performance. Okay, maybe some injury prevention would have been nice to implement in the early days, but even then, I learned from the setbacks, and it's like you have to have them. As a person who is aspiring for the top, it's no straight line to the top of the mountain. There are sort of highs and lows and ups and downs. But yeah, if you are going to make it, you do have to be able to see that journey, have the love for it, and make sure that you're not aspiring to do it on your own.
Love what you do.
Sorry, and apologies, that was a very long answer. So hopefully you did get the message across.
It did, yeah, absolutely. Andy, anything you want to ask?
No, I think that's a lovely place to end it. I've really enjoyed the whole conversation. I think there's a lot that can be taken for anyone working in almost any area of sport or business. So I really appreciate your time today, and I'm excited to get this one out there and get the feedback from the listeners.
Thank you. No, I'd say, and thanks. You asked some fantastic questions that just got me chatting, and hopefully I didn't waffle on too long. But
Thank you for listening to the Sports Pundit podcast, kindly produced by the amazing team at 06. I'll include more information about the guests and the topics covered in the show notes. Head to sportspundit.co to find previous editions, access the newsletter, and to sign up for our WhatsApp group and see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.